Did you hear what just happened? A young African president just stood before the world, looked Donald Trump straight in the eye, and said the words no one else had dared to say. This wasn't just a speech, it was a moment that shook global politics to its core. Ibrahim Traore didn't ask for respect. He demanded it. And in doing so, he had just started a revolution. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could change history. Did he really just say that to Trump? The question echoed across social media, newsrooms, and living rooms around the globe. This wasn't just a trending topic, it was history in the making. It happened at the prestigious Global Leadership Summit in Geneva, where the most powerful leaders of the modern world had gathered to discuss global peace, economic development, and the future of humanity. Inside a room glittering with polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and protected by elite security, presidents, prime ministers, billionaires, and monarchs sat shoulder to shoulder. The world expected ceremonial speeches and political pleasantries. No one was prepared for what would unfold. From one corner of the Grand Hall, Ibrahim Traore, the young and unflinching president of Burkina Faso, sat in silence. His eyes were sharp and focused. Dressed in his military uniform, the national flag proudly displayed on his chest, he exuded quiet strength. Surrounding him were global powerhouses, leaders of nations with nuclear arsenals, sprawling economies, and legacies of influence. Across from him sat Donald J. Trump, the bold and controversial former U.S. president. Trump, never one to shy away from provocation, had just delivered a fiery speech. His words, as usual, were confident and polarizing, but one sentence changed everything. "You know," Trump said, glancing around the room with a smug grin, "when you look at Africa, you just see chaos and corruption. You don't know who's running what, and honestly, it's a mess. A total disaster." Some in the room chuckled nervously. Others exchanged uncertain glances. A few nodded, perhaps out of habit or fear. But not Traore. He didn't laugh. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He didn't glance around to gauge reactions. He simply stood, not in haste, not in anger, but with calm resolve. His boots echoed across the marble floor as he stepped forward, each movement amplifying the silence. Then, standing center stage, under the full gaze of the international community, he spoke. "With all due respect, Mr. Trump, you have no idea what Africa truly is." A hush fell. Heads turned, cameras zoomed in, security stiffened. Some gasped, others reached for their phones. Nobody saw this coming. Here was a leader from one of the world's poorest nations, speaking plainly to one of its most powerful men. Traore's voice was steady and clear, not raised, not defensive, just truthful. Africa is not chaos. Africa is not corruption. Africa is history. Africa is resilience. Africa is hope. He turned to Trump, locking eyes. "When your ancestors came to our lands, they didn't find disorder. They found gold. They found knowledge. They found kingdoms. They found peace." His tone never wavered. What followed was colonialism, slavery, plunder. Generations were erased. Borders were drawn with no understanding. Families were separated. And even after independence, we were left with systems designed to collapse. There were murmurs in the crowd. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, we have problems," Traore continued. "But do you know why? Because our minerals power your phones. Our cocoa sweetens your desserts. Our oil fuels your engines. And in return, our children get hunger. Our youth get unemployment. And our leaders are judged, shamed, or bought." He paused, allowing the silence to speak before continuing. "You call us corrupt. But what do you call the Western companies that pay bribes to steal our resources? What do you call the tax havens where African wealth vanishes? What do you call your silence when our people die in forgotten wars you helped ignite?" The room was stunned. Even Trump leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Then Traore shared a story. There is a boy in my country. His name is Emmanuel. He's 12 years old. Every day, before the sun rises, he walks 6 miles to fetch clean water for his mother and siblings. On the way, he passes gold mines. Gold that doesn't belong to him. Gold that's shipped to Europe and America. He studies by candlelight. He eats 1 meal a day. And yet dreams. He dreams of becoming an engineer, not to flee to the West, but to build his own Africa. Traore's voice softened. That boy's dream is not a visa. It's not a plane ticket. It's justice. It's dignity. And today, I stand here for him and for millions like him. Many in the audience had tears in their eyes. Journalists accustomed to dull speeches and diplomatic rhetoric felt something shift. What began as confrontation had become a call to conscience. "We don't need your sympathy," Traore said in conclusion. "We need fairness. We need partners, not saviors. We need trade, not aid. We are not your burden. We are your equals." A beat of silence followed then, a single clap, then another. Soon, the room rose in a standing ovation. Presidents from Latin America stood. Prime ministers from Asia joined in. Even a few European leaders appeared visibly moved. For the first time in a long time, the summit felt real, human, honest. Donald Trump remained seated, expression fixed. Later, when asked by reporters, he said, "Look, I don't agree with everything he said, but I'll tell you one thing, that guy has guts." But the story didn't end there. It was only beginning. As the room fell into silence, Traore remained standing at the center of the hall not with anger, but with a power born of truth, pain, and deep love for his people. He was young, barely in his mid-30s, surrounded by statesmen twice his age. His uniform bore the scars of his nation's struggle, but his words carried the weight of an entire continent. And he wasn't done. "You see chaos when you look at Africa," he said. "I see colors. I see communities. I see 1,000 languages and 10,000 songs." He turned slowly, addressing the entire room, now not just Trump. "I see mothers who walk miles to feed their children. I see youth building businesses with no electricity and no Wi-Fi. I see artists turning war-torn streets into poetry and dance. That's my Africa." The room remained spellbound. No one looked at their phones. No one whispered. All eyes were on him. "You speak of corruption," Traore said, voice unwavering. "But corruption is not African. It is global. And for every corrupt African leader, there is a foreign partner enabling it." He looked across the room once more. "Don't lecture us about governance while shielding our stolen wealth. Don't speak of peace while arming our enemies. Don't preach democracy while choosing which leaders live or die." He let those words settle in the silence. "We want no more lectures," he said. "Only accountability. We seek no more pity-only partnership. We are not victims. We are survivors. Builders, creators, leaders." He took one final breath. Africa does not beg. Africa rises. As he stepped back, thunderous applause erupted once more, only this time it felt different. It wasn't for the sake of ceremony. It was because the world had just heard something true. The headlines that followed were unlike any before. Ibrahim Traore redefines global leadership. Burkina Faso, President speaks for all of Africa. And perhaps the most honest of them all, the day the world finally listened. Because on that day, in that room, in the heart of Geneva, a new chapter began, not just for one country, but for a continent long misunderstood. And the world would never see Africa the same way again. But you never speak of how it survives. Corruption does not grow in the shadows of Africa alone. It is watered from offshore accounts in Europe. It is flies in banks that turn a blind eye. It is protected by law firms in New York and London. He paused, scanning the room, letting the truth sink in. "You call us corrupt, but what do you call the billion-dollar companies that extract our gold, our oil, our diamonds while our schools collapse? What do you call the CEOs who sip champagne while children in Burkina Faso dig through dirt with their bare hands?" Then came the moment that changed everything. Traore's voice softened, as if pulling the room closer. Let me tell you a story, a real story, about a boy named Emmanuel. He is 12 years old. He lives in a small village in my country, Burkina Faso. Every morning, before the sun rises, Emmanuel wakes up and walks 6 miles, not to go to school, not to play, but to fetch water for his family. 6 miles, barefoot, every single day. The room fell silent again. You could hear people breathing. He walks past gold mines. Gold that ends up in your jewelry stores, your smartphones, your luxury vaults. But Emmanuel has never seen the inside of a classroom with electricity. His school has no roof. His mother cooks over firewood. His father died in a mine collapse, digging for resources he would never touch. Some in the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. And yet, Traore added, Emmanuel has a dream. Not to leave Africa. Not to escape to America. His dream is to become an engineer. To build wells, roads, and hospitals in his own village. He wants to give back, not run away. Traore's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. That boy doesn't need pity. He needs power. He needs opportunity. He needs a system that doesn't steal his future before he's even had a chance to live it. He looked directly at Trump. You say Africa is failing, but perhaps the truth is this: Africa was never allowed to succeed. A long pause. Then Traore continued. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for change. A change in how the world sees us. A change in how deals are made. A change in how stories are told. He stepped closer to the center of the stage. I am not here to apologize for my continent. I am here to announce its arrival. We are not your experiment. We are not your charity case. We are not waiting for permission. Africa is ready to stand. And I, Ibrahim Traore, will stand first. A murmur began to rise in the room. It started slowly, some claps, a few nods, then louder applause, and suddenly a standing ovation. Leaders from Latin America stood first, moved by the honesty and courage. Then came ministers from Asia, presidents from the Caribbean, and even officials from European nations. Even those who disagreed with Traore's political views could not deny the truth in his words. Cameras were rolling. Journalists scribbled furiously. Social media was already on fire. The clip was being shared online, edited into reels and, quote, graphics. The hashtag #Traore Speaks Truth was trending in dozens of countries before the session had even ended. And standing in the middle of it all was a man who had come to the summit as a young African president and was now leaving as a global symbol of resistance and hope. Donald Trump, seated in the front row, didn't clap, but he didn't interrupt either. He simply sat there, arms folded, a curious look in his eyes, as though trying to process what had just happened. Later, when asked by a reporter what he thought of Traore's comments, Trump replied, I've heard a lot of speeches in my time. Some boring, some good. That one, that was powerful. I don't agree with everything he said, but I respect the guy's fire. But the real story wasn't about Trump. It was about Africa finding its voice in front of the world. And the man who delivered that voice, Ibrahim Traore, was now being celebrated not just as a president, but as a revolutionary. Back in Burkina Faso, thousands gathered in the streets, waving flags and chanting his name. Murals were painted overnight. Children wore shirts with his face. Radio stations played clips of his speech every hour. Across Africa, millions felt a new sense of pride, because someone had finally spoken their truth at the highest stage. Ibrahim Traore had not just spoken for himself. He had spoken for the farmers in Ghana, the miners in Congo, the street vendors in Nigeria, and the school children in Kenya. He had spoken for Emmanuel and the millions like him whose dreams had been ignored for far too long. And the world finally was listening. Within just a few hours of the summit's conclusion, the internet exploded. Clips of Ibrahim Traore's bold speech's voice, his passion, his fearless stance against a global superpower spread like wildfire. Social media platforms across the world were flooded with reactions. The hashtag number, Traore Speaks Truth, surged to the #1 trending topic globally. From Nairobi to New York, people shared the video, quoted his words, and celebrated the moment a young African leader changed the tone of international politics. Mainstream media picked up the story. Headlines read, "The African Lion Roars at Global Summit. Traore challenges Trump and wins the world's respect. Burkina Faso's president sparks global movement." Millions were moved, not just by what he said, but by how he said it. Calm, brave, honest. In Africa, the impact was seismic. Young people especially felt something they hadn't felt in a long time when looking at a leader: inspiration. This wasn't just another politician speaking in carefully crafted statements. This was one of their own, speaking truth without fear, in a room filled with power and privilege. A 19-year-old university student in Senegal tweeted, "For the first time in my life, I feel proud to be African. Thank you, Ibrahim Traore." In Nigeria, a rap artist released a freestyle titled, "We Are Not Chaos," using Traore's words as the hook. In Kenya, a school teacher printed copies of the speech and handed them out to her students as a reading assignment. In Mali, a street artist painted a giant mural of Traore, holding the African continent in his arms, with the words, "Not asking for pity, demanding respect." Even outside of Africa, people were paying attention. International activists, journalists, and influencers began using their platforms to talk about Africa's untapped potential and the systemic injustices Traore had highlighted. Suddenly, conversations around African agency, stolen wealth, and global inequality were happening in places that had long ignored them. And what about Donald Trump? When asked about Traore's remarks in a later interview with a U.S. news outlet, Trump responded with his usual candor. "Look, I don't agree with the guy. I think he's wrong about some things. But I'll tell you this, he's got guts. He speaks from the heart, and I respect that." But at this point, it didn't really matter what Trump thought, because the story wasn't about Trump anymore. The real story was about a global realization that Africa was done whispering. Traore had tapped into something deeper than politics. He had sparked a movement, a spiritual awakening, a cultural reawakening, a sense of pride and purpose that had been sleeping under years of foreign domination, corruption, and hopelessness. And as the world watched, one thing became crystal clear. Africa wasn't asking for permission anymore. Africa was standing, and Ibrahim Traore was leading the way. And he didn't stop at just one speech. Just a few weeks after the Geneva summit, President Traore launched what he called the Africa First Initiative. The goal was clear and bold: to keep African resources in African hands. The program included new contracts with local companies to mine and process gold, oil, and other minerals. It introduced strict anti-corruption laws with real enforcement, even targeting officials within his own government. There were youth empowerment programs offering scholarships, startup grants, and training in agriculture, technology, and education. A continental task force was also created to investigate illegal wealth transfers and repatriate stolen assets from overseas accounts. And here's the most amazing part: dozens of other African countries expressed interest in joining the initiative. Ghana, Mali, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and even oil-rich Nigeria began sending delegations to Ouagadougou to discuss partnerships. Leaders who had once operated in fear of offending foreign powers now began speaking with newfound confidence. "We are not poor," one leader said during a televised panel. "We are rich nations with stolen futures. It's time we take them back." Ibrahim Traore, once mocked by Western critics as a military populist, was now being called a visionary. And among the youth, he had become legendary. They called him the African Lionot because he was violent, not because he wanted war, but because he was fearless, fierce, and protective. Across the continent, children wore T-shirts with his face, and the phrase Africa First. Murals of him appeared in schoolyards and public squares. Musicians wrote songs in his honor, celebrating the man who gave Africa a new voice. And yet, Traore remained humble. In one of his later speeches, he said, "I am just one man. I cannot save Africa, but I can remind her of her power." The real change will come not from me, but from the people, from the youth, from the mothers, from the farmers and teachers and builders. He ended that speech with words that would soon be printed on posters across the continent. We are no longer waiting. We are rising. And rise they did, not with violence, not with hate, but with vision, unity, and dignity. Ibrahim Traore had done more than confront a global superpower. He had ignited a Firea movement of minds and hearts. And while the road ahead would surely be difficult, one thing was now certain. Africa had found its voice, and the world would never be the same. Sometimes it takes just one voice to wake up millions. Ibrahim Traore's words shook the world, not because he attacked, but because he stood for something greater. In a time of power games and political distractions, he reminded us what true leadership looks like: courage, truth, and love for your people. And whether you agree with him or not, one thing is crystal clear. Africa is rising, and it's not asking for permission anymore. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for more amazing content. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories.